I was 28 years old when I discovered that my entire life had been quietly unraveling for months, thread by thread, because of someone I trusted more than almost anyone else in the world. The morning I found out, the air in my apartment felt thick and suffocating, like breathing through wet cotton. I remember the way the September sunlight filtered through my blinds, casting those familiar zebra stripes across my hardwood floor, and how that light seemed to mock me as I stared at the bank statement in my trembling hands. My name is Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, and up until that Tuesday morning, I thought I knew exactly who I was and where I stood in my family. I thought I understood the people I had grown up with, the faces around every holiday table, the voices that had sung me happy birthday for nearly 3 decades. But trust, I learned that day, can be as fragile as spun glass, and when it shatters, the pieces cut deeper than you ever imagined possible. The phone call that changed everything came at 7:43 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was stirring honey into my coffee, watching the golden spiral dissolve into the dark liquid, when my cell phone buzzed against the granite counter. The vibration made a sharp rattling sound that cut through the quiet of my kitchen. I almost didn't answer it because I didn't recognize the number, but something about the persistence of the caller made me swipe to accept. Miss Mitchell? This is Detective Rodriguez with the San Diego Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. The voice was professional but carried an undertone of gravity that made my stomach clench immediately. I need to speak with you about some suspicious activity we've detected involving your personal information. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, and I watched as if in slow motion as it tumbled toward the floor. The ceramic made a sharp crack as it hit, and hot coffee splashed across my bare feet, but I barely registered the burn. My heart was suddenly pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out everything else. I'm sorry, what kind of suspicious activity? My voice sounded foreign to me, higher-pitched and strained. I pressed my back against the cool stainless steel of my refrigerator, needing something solid to hold me up. Ma'am, we have reason to believe someone has been using your social security number and personal information to access financial accounts belonging to several members of your family. We'd like you to come down to the station today if possible. There are some things we need to discuss. The next hour passed in a blur of frantic activity. I threw on the first clothes I could find, a pair of jeans that smelled faintly of the lavender fabric softener my mother had always used, and a blue sweater that felt scratchy against my suddenly sensitive skin. My hands shook so badly I could barely get my key into the ignition of my Honda Civic. The leather steering wheel felt cold and unfamiliar under my palms as I drove through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, everything looking slightly different through the lens of this new reality. The police station smelled like disinfectant and burned coffee, with an underlying mustiness that reminded me of old books. Detective Rodriguez was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She led me to a small conference room with fluorescent lights that buzzed softly overhead and made everything look slightly green and unreal. Miss Mitchell, I want you to know that you're not in any trouble here, she began, her voice gentle but serious. You're a victim in this case. But I need to ask you some questions about your family, particularly about anyone who might have had access to your personal information. She spread out a series of documents across the scratched wooden table. Bank statements, credit applications, loan documents. All bearing my name, my social security number, my signature. But as I looked more closely, something felt wrong. The signatures looked like mine, but they weren't quite right. There was something slightly off about the loops in the letters, the way the S in Sarah curved just a little too sharply. These documents show that someone using your identity has been systematically accessing bank accounts belonging to your grandmother, your uncle, and your parents over the past 8 months, Detective Rodriguez explained. They've withdrawn a total of approximately $47,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $47,000. I thought about my grandmother's fixed income, how she clipped coupons from the Sunday paper and reused tea bags. I thought about my parents, who had been talking about postponing their retirement because money was tight. The fluorescent light seemed to get brighter, making my eyes water. I don't understand, I whispered, my throat feeling raw and tight. How is this possible? How would someone get my information? Detective Rodriguez leaned forward, her expression sympathetic but professional. That's what we need to figure out. I need you to think carefully about who in your life would have access to your personal documents. Someone who's been in your home, maybe. Someone who you trust enough that you might not have been careful about leaving important papers around. As she spoke, images flashed through my mind. Birthday parties at my apartment. Holiday gatherings where family members had stayed over. The spare key I kept under the fake rock by my front door. My office at home where I kept all my important documents in a filing cabinet that I never bothered to lock because who would need to steal from me? I was surrounded by people who loved me. We also have some security footage from one of the bank transactions, Detective Rodriguez continued. I need to warn you, this might be difficult to see. She turned her laptop screen toward me, and I found myself looking at grainy black and white footage from a bank security camera. The timestamp showed 3 months ago, a date when I had been at work, sitting in meetings all day. But there on the screen was someone who looked exactly like me walking up to a teller window. Same height, same build, same long brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. The person was wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The person in this video was able to access your uncle's account because they had your ID, which they claimed to have found, and they said they were helping him with his banking because he was ill. The teller didn't question it because they had all the right information, and they looked like the Sarah Mitchell on the identification. I stared at the screen, feeling like I was falling down a very deep hole. The person moved with a confidence that was chilling, clearly comfortable with what they were doing. They handed papers to the teller with practiced ease, chatted casually, even laughed at something the teller said. This wasn't someone nervous about committing a crime. This was someone who felt entitled to do what they were doing. Detective Rodriguez, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, I think I might know who this is. The truth had been creeping up on me since the moment I saw that signature that looked almost, but not quite, like mine. There was only one person in my family who could pull this off so convincingly. Only one person who looked enough like me to fool a bank teller, who knew enough about our family's financial situation to know which accounts to target, who had been in my apartment countless times and would know exactly where I kept my important documents. My cousin Jessica, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Jessica Martinez. She's my aunt's daughter, and we look a lot alike. People have always said we could be sisters. Detective Rodriguez nodded grimly. Tell me about Jessica. Where do you begin when you're asked to describe someone you've loved like a sister your entire life? Jessica had been born just 6 months after me, and our mothers, who were sisters themselves, had raised us almost like twins. We had shared cribs as babies, played dress-up in each other's clothes as children, been each other's maid of honor at our respective weddings and divorces. Jessica knew every secret I'd ever had, every embarrassing moment, every fear and hope and dream. She's been having money problems lately, I admitted, the words feeling like a betrayal even as I spoke them. She got divorced last year, lost her job about 6 months ago. She's been staying with different family members, trying to get back on her feet. The detective made notes as I talked, and I found myself remembering things that hadn't seemed important at the time. How Jessica had been particularly interested when I mentioned that I was helping my grandmother organize her finances. How she had offered to help me sort through my filing cabinet when she stayed over last month. How she had borrowed my car several times and would have had access to my wallet, my insurance cards, all the documents I kept in my glove compartment. She stayed with me for 2 weeks in July, I continued, feeling sick to my stomach. I gave her my spare key so she could come and go freely. She said she was job hunting, going to interviews. I wanted to help her get back on her feet. The investigation moved quickly after I identified Jessica. Detective Rodriguez explained that they had been building a case for weeks, but they needed victim cooperation and positive identification to move forward with charges. Within 48 hours, they had enough evidence to issue a warrant for Jessica's arrest. I spent those 2 days in a strange, numb state, going through the motions of my normal life while feeling like I was watching everything happen to someone else. I went to work at the accounting firm where I'd been employed for 6 years, sat in my familiar cubicle with its family photos and coffee-stained desk calendar, and tried to focus on spreadsheets and client files. But every time my phone rang, every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, my heart would race and my palms would start to sweat. The worst part was that I couldn't tell anyone yet. Detective Rodriguez had asked me to keep the investigation confidential until they made the arrest, to prevent Jessica from fleeing or destroying evidence. So I had to sit through dinner with my parents on Wednesday night, listening to them worry about my grandmother's recent financial troubles, knowing that I had the answer to their concerns but unable to share it. "Mom's been so stressed about money lately," my father said, cutting into his meatloaf with more force than necessary. "She keeps saying her account balance doesn't look right, but you know how she is with technology." We figured she was just getting confused about online banking. My mother nodded, pushing food around on her plate without really eating. "I've been thinking maybe we should take over her finances completely. She's getting older, maybe she's not as sharp as she used to be. But you know how independent she is. She'd be devastated if she thought we didn't trust her to manage her own affairs." I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, feeling the weight of what I knew pressing down on me like a physical presence. My grandmother wasn't getting confused. She wasn't losing her mental faculties. She was being systematically robbed by someone she trusted, someone she had held as a baby and sung lullabies to, someone she still sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts to every year. "I'm sure it will all work out," I managed to say, my voice sounding hollow and false even to me. My mother looked at me with concern. "Are you feeling all right, honey? You look pale." I excused myself early that night, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely a lie. As I drove home through the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood, every house seemed to hold memories of Jessica. The park where we had played on the swings until our hands were raw from gripping the chains. The corner store where we had pooled our allowance money to buy candy, always sharing everything equally. The church where we had both been confirmed, promising to live lives of honesty and integrity. Thursday morning, I woke to my phone ringing at 6:27. Detective Rodriguez's voice was brisk and professional. "We have Jessica Martinez in custody," she said. "She was arrested early this morning at her current residence. We found additional evidence during the search of her room, including several of your personal documents and what appears to be a notebook with financial information about various family members." I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my pajamas, trying to process what I was hearing. Jessica was in jail. My cousin, my best friend, my almost sister, was sitting in a police station somewhere, probably scared and angry and maybe finally realizing that her actions had real consequences. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we need you to come in and make a formal statement. And unfortunately, you're going to need to contact your family members and let them know what's been happening. They'll need to review their accounts, change their passwords, take steps to protect themselves from further fraud." The prospect of making those phone calls filled me with a dread so deep it felt like drowning. How do you tell your 74-year-old grandmother that her granddaughter has been stealing from her for months? How do you explain to your parents that the family they had raised with so much love and care had produced someone capable of this kind of betrayal? I started with my Uncle Robert, Jessica's stepfather, figuring that he had a right to know first. Uncle Robert had married Jessica's mother when Jessica was 12, and he had always treated her like his own daughter. He had paid for her college education, walked her down the aisle at her wedding, been a shoulder to cry on during her divorce. "Sarah?" His voice was warm and familiar when he answered the phone. "What's going on, sweetheart? It's pretty early for you to be calling." "Uncle Robert, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be very difficult to hear." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "It's about Jessica." There was a long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was careful and controlled. "What about Jessica?" I told him everything. About the police investigation, about the stolen money, about Jessica's arrest. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line, and at one point I thought he might be crying, but he didn't interrupt me. When I finished, the silence stretched on for so long I wondered if the call had been dropped. "Uncle Robert? Are you there?" "I'm here," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. I can't believe it. I mean, I can believe it, which is maybe the worst part. She's been so desperate lately, so angry about her situation. But to steal from family, to steal from Grandma Rose. He trailed off, and I could picture him sitting in his kitchen, probably at the same table where Jessica had eaten hundreds of meals growing up, where he had helped her with homework and listened to her teenage problems and celebrated her achievements.
"I have to call Anna," he said, referring to Jessica's mother, my aunt. "She's going to be devastated. Jessica is her only child, and after everything they've been through." I knew what he meant. Aunt Anna had raised Jessica as a single mother for 12 years before marrying Uncle Robert. She had worked 2 jobs to pay for Jessica's dance classes and school trips and everything else a growing girl needed. Jessica had been the center of Anna's world, her pride and joy, her greatest accomplishment. The call to my parents was even harder. I could hear the shock in their voices as I explained the situation, followed quickly by anger and then a deep, profound sadness. "That poor girl," my mother said, and for a moment I wasn't sure if she was talking about Jessica or about me. What could have driven her to this? We're family. If she needed money, why didn't she just ask for help? But we all knew the answer to that question. Jessica had asked for help, repeatedly, over the past year. She had borrowed money from various family members, small amounts at first, then larger sums. She had promised to pay it all back when she got back on her feet, but somehow she never quite managed to do that. Eventually, people had started saying no to her requests, not out of cruelty but out of their own financial limitations and a growing concern that they were enabling rather than helping. The hardest call was to my grandmother. Grandma Rose had raised 5 children during the Depression and World War II, had buried a husband and a son, had survived cancer and a heart attack and decades of hardship with dignity and grace. But when I told her what Jessica had done, she sounded older and more fragile than I had ever heard her. "Oh, Sarah," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My little Jessica. How could she do such a thing? I would have given her anything she needed. All she had to do was ask." "I know, Grandma. We all know. Is she in trouble? I mean, serious trouble?" I had to tell her about the arrest, about the possibility of prison time, about the fact that Jessica was facing multiple felony charges that could result in years behind bars. As I spoke, I could hear my grandmother crying quietly, and it broke my heart in ways I hadn't known were possible. "I don't want to press charges," she said suddenly. "She's my granddaughter. She's family. People make mistakes, and family forgives. Grandma, it's not that simple. This isn't just a mistake. Jessica stole almost $50,000 from you and Uncle Robert and Mom and Dad. She used my identity to do it. She planned this out over months. The police are calling it organized fraud." "I don't care what they're calling it," Grandma Rose said, her voice gaining strength. "I've been poor before, I can be poor again. But I can't get my granddaughter back if she goes to prison. I can't undo the damage this will do to our family." Over the next several weeks, I learned more about the scope of Jessica's deception than I ever wanted to know. The police investigation revealed a level of planning and manipulation that was staggering in its complexity. Jessica hadn't just stolen money, she had carefully researched each family member's financial vulnerabilities and exploited them with surgical precision. She had accessed my grandmother's account by claiming that Grandma Rose was in the hospital and needed someone to handle her banking. She had used my identity to convince my uncle's bank that she was helping him refinance his mortgage, which is how she gained access to his home equity line of credit. For my parents, she had posed as me and claimed she was helping them consolidate their credit card debt, which allowed her to access their savings account. Each lie had been carefully crafted to appeal to the specific concerns and blind spots of the people she was targeting. She knew that my grandmother was self-conscious about her health issues and wouldn't want to admit if she was having problems. She knew that my uncle was proud and would appreciate having family help with financial matters rather than admitting he was struggling. She knew that my parents trusted me implicitly and would never question anything I was supposedly doing to help them. But perhaps the most devastating revelation came when Detective Rodriguez showed me the notebook they had found in Jessica's room. It was a composition book with a black and white marbled cover, the kind we had used in elementary school, and it was filled with detailed notes about our entire family's financial situation. She had been planning this for months, Detective Rodriguez explained as she turned the pages. "Look at this. She's got your grandmother's social security number, her bank routing numbers, notes about when she typically goes to the bank. She's got your uncle's work schedule, information about his mortgage company, even details about his wife's medical bills." Each page was like a knife to my heart.
There were notes about my parents' retirement accounts, observations about when they were most likely to be out of the house, even sketches of where they kept their important documents. Jessica had been in their home countless times as a beloved family member, and she had used each visit to gather intelligence for her theft.
But the section about me was the most chilling. Jessica had documented my daily routine with frightening accuracy.
She knew what time I left for work, when I went grocery shopping, which days I went to the gym. She had noted the location of my spare key, made copies of important documents from my filing cabinet, even figured out my online banking passwords by watching me type them in. "The level of premeditation here is extraordinary," Detective Rodriguez said grimly. "This wasn't a desperate person making a bad decision in a moment of crisis. This was a systematic, long-term plan to defraud her own family members." I stared at the notebook, recognizing Jessica's familiar handwriting, the same careful script she had used to write me birthday cards and thank you notes and letters when we were separated during college. The handwriting that had once represented love and connection and shared memories now looked sinister and calculated. "There's something else you need to know," Detective Rodriguez continued.
"We believe Jessica may have been planning to disappear after she accumulated enough money.
We found research on her computer about obtaining fake identification documents and moving to countries without extradition treaties with the United States." The room seemed to tilt around me. Not only had Jessica been stealing from us, but she had been planning to vanish from our lives entirely, leaving us to discover the theft slowly and painfully while she started a new life somewhere else with our money.
"How much was she planning to take?" I asked, my voice barely audible.
Based on her notes, it looks like she was targeting around $200,000 total. She had identified additional accounts belonging to other family members that she hadn't accessed yet.
$200,000.
The number was incomprehensible. I thought about my cousin Maria, who was saving to buy her first house. My cousin David, who was putting money away for his daughter's college education. My great-aunt Eleanor, who lived on a fixed income and counted every penny.
Jessica had been planning to rob all of them. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for late October.
Jessica had been released on bail after Uncle Robert, incredibly, had put up his house as collateral. I couldn't understand how he could do that, how he could still be willing to help her after what she had done, but Aunt Anna had begged him, and he had never been able to say no to his wife.
3 days before the hearing, Jessica called me.
I was at work, reviewing quarterly tax reports for a client, when my cell phone rang. I almost didn't answer because I was in the middle of a complicated calculation, but something made me look at the screen. Jessica's name was there, the same contact entry I'd had for 15 years, complete with the silly photo I'd taken of her making a ridiculous face at my birthday party last year.
My hands were shaking as I accepted the call. "Sarah?"
Jessica's voice was small and tentative, nothing like the confident, vivacious cousin I had known all my life.
"Please don't hang up. I need to talk to you."
I looked around the office, suddenly aware of how public my workspace was, how many people might overhear this conversation.
"I can't talk right now, Jessica. I'm at work. Then meet me somewhere. Please."
"I know you have every right to hate me, but I need you to understand why I did what I did.
I need you to know that I never meant for it to go this far."
Against every instinct I had, against the advice of Detective Rodriguez and my parents and my own common sense, I agreed to meet her. Maybe it was 28 years of shared history that made it impossible to simply cut her out of my life. Maybe it was the naive hope that there was some explanation that would make sense of the senseless. Or maybe I just needed to look her in the eye and hear her try to justify what she had done. We met at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town, a place neither of us had been before, somewhere neutral and anonymous. I arrived first and chose a table in the back corner, as far from other customers as possible. When Jessica walked in, I barely recognized her. She had lost weight, enough that her clothes hung loosely on her frame. Her hair, which had always been her pride and joy, was pulled back in a messy bun with several strands escaping around her face. She looked exhausted, older than her 28 years, and there was a haunted quality in her eyes that made me think of animals caught in traps. "Thank you for coming," she said as she sat down across from me. Her voice was hoarse, as if she had been crying or shouting or both.
"I wasn't sure you would. I'm not sure why I did, I replied honestly. What could you possibly say to me right now that would matter? Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. I know you hate me. I know everyone in the family hates me now. I know I've destroyed everything we had, everything we were to each other. But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you specifically. I never wanted to hurt any of you. But you did hurt us, Jessica. You stole from us. You used my identity to commit crimes. You were planning to disappear and leave us to deal with the consequences. I know. The words came out as barely a whisper. I know, and I will never forgive myself for it. But Sarah, I was desperate. You have no idea how desperate I was. She started to tell me about the months after her divorce, about how her ex-husband had hidden assets and left her with nothing, about how she had lost job after job because she was too emotional, too distracted, too broken to function properly. She told me about the depression that had settled over her like a blanket, making it hard to get out of bed, hard to see any future for herself that didn't involve poverty and failure and shame. I started small, she said, her voice gaining strength as she talked. I just borrowed a little from Grandma's account, telling myself I would pay it back as soon as I found work. But then I couldn't find work, and I needed the money for rent, for food, for basic survival. And it became easier to take a little more than to face the reality that I was failing at everything. So you decided to drag all of us down with you? I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. You decided that your problems gave you the right to steal from people who loved you? No. The word came out louder than she intended, causing several other customers to look in our direction. Jessica lowered her voice, leaning forward across the small table. I never thought of it as stealing. I thought of it as borrowing from people who had more than they needed, people who would understand if they knew how desperate I was. Then why didn't you just ask for help? Why the elaborate lies and fake identities and months of deception? Jessica was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands folded on the table. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with shame. Because I knew you would all say no, she admitted. I had already borrowed money from everyone, remember? I had already broken promises to pay it back. I knew that if I asked for more help, you would want to know what happened to the money I had already been given, and I couldn't admit that I had spent it on stupid things, on trying to maintain a lifestyle I couldn't afford, on pretending that I was doing better than I really was. I spent money on clothes I didn't need because I was embarrassed to show up at job interviews looking poor, Jessica continued, her voice breaking. I spent money on expensive dinners because I was lonely and I thought if I took guys to nice places, they might want to stick around. I spent money on a new car because I was tired of being the cousin who drove a beat-up Honda while everyone else seemed to have their lives together. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this confession with the person I thought I knew. The Jessica I remembered had never been materialistic or shallow. She had been the cousin who made fun of people who cared too much about brand names, who preferred thrift store finds to department store purchases, who had once said that people who defined themselves by their possessions were missing the point of life entirely. You used my identity, Jessica, I said, feeling the weight of that violation settling over me again. You pretended to be me while you were committing crimes. Do you have any idea what that feels like? Every time I use my credit card now, every time I sign a document, I wonder if someday someone is going to accuse me of something you did while pretending to be me. I know, she whispered. I chose you because we look so much alike, because I knew I could pull it off. But also because I thought if I got caught, you would understand. You would forgive me because we're so close, because we've always been there for each other. The audacity of that statement took my breath away. She had deliberately chosen to victimize me, to put my reputation and my legal standing at risk, because she believed our relationship gave her the right to do so. She had weaponized our love against me. How could you think I would understand identity theft, Jessica? How could you think anyone would understand what you've done? Because I was drowning. The words exploded out of her with a force that startled both of us. I was literally drowning, Sarah, and I couldn't see any other way to save myself. Every day I woke up, I felt like I was suffocating. I couldn't pay my bills, I couldn't find work that paid enough to live on, I couldn't afford to maintain relationships because I couldn't afford to go anywhere or do anything. I felt like I was disappearing, like I was becoming invisible, like I didn't matter to anyone anymore. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she spoke. I used to be somebody, remember? I used to have a career, a marriage, a house, a life that meant something. And then it all fell apart, and I was nobody. I was just the pathetic divorced cousin living on everyone else's charity, taking up space in other people's homes, being pitied and tolerated and managed. I felt a stab of recognition at her words. I remembered how proud Jessica had been when she landed her first real job after college, working for a marketing firm in downtown San Diego. I remembered her excitement when she bought her first house, how she had invited the whole family over for a housewarming party and given us tours of every room, pointing out the features she loved most. I remembered her wedding day, how radiant she had looked in her white dress, how convinced she was that she had found her happily ever after. And I remembered the slow dissolution of all of that. The job layoffs that came with economic downturns. The marriage that crumbled under financial stress and fundamental incompatibilities. The house that had to be sold when the divorce settlement left her unable to afford the mortgage. The series of smaller apartments, each one a step down from the last, until she was living with family members because she couldn't even afford rent. I'm sorry you were struggling, I said carefully. I'm sorry we didn't realize how bad things had gotten for you. But Jessica, plenty of people face financial hardship without turning to crime. Plenty of people lose their jobs, get divorced, have to rebuild their lives from scratch. They don't steal from their families. I know that, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I know I'm weak, I know I'm selfish, I know I made terrible choices. But in the moment, when I was making those decisions, it felt like the only option I had. It felt like survival. What about the notebook? I asked. The one with all the detailed information about everyone's financial situation, everyone's schedules and routines? That wasn't survival, Jessica. That was planning. That was calculating. That was predatory. Her face crumpled at the word predatory. I know how it looks, she said. I know it makes me seem like some kind of criminal mastermind. But it wasn't like that. It started with just paying attention to things people said about money, about their concerns, about their routines. And then I started writing things down because I was afraid I would forget, and I was already feeling like my memory wasn't reliable because I was so stressed and depressed. And the research about fake IDs? About moving to countries without extradition treaties? Jessica was quiet for so long I wondered if she was going to answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was so low I had to strain to hear her. I was scared, she admitted. As I took more money, as the lies got bigger and more complicated, I became terrified of getting caught. I started having panic attacks, nightmares about police coming to arrest me. So I researched escape plans, not because I was definitely going to use them, but because having them made me feel like I had some control over my situation. Were you going to disappear, Jessica? Were you going to take our money and start a new life somewhere else? She looked directly at me for the first time since she had started crying. I don't know, she said. Maybe. If I had managed to get enough money together, if I had felt like I could never face the family again, maybe I would have run. The thought of you all knowing what I had done, the thought of seeing disappointment and disgust in everyone's eyes, was almost unbearable. We sat in silence for several minutes. The coffee shop around us continued its normal rhythm, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversation, the clink of cups against saucers. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that they were witnessing the death of a relationship that had been one of the most important things in both of our lives. What happens now? Jessica asked eventually. Now you face the consequences of what you've done, I said. You go to court, you probably go to prison, and you figure out how to live with the fact that you destroyed your family's trust in you. And us? Is there any possibility that someday you might be able to forgive me? I had been dreading this question since the moment I agreed to meet her. For weeks, I had been trying to figure out how I felt about Jessica, whether the love I had for her could survive what she had done, whether forgiveness was even possible in a situation like this. I don't know, I said honestly. Right now, I can't even look at you without feeling angry and betrayed and heartbroken. You were my best friend, Jessica. You were the person I trusted most in the world. You knew things about me that nobody else knew, and you used that knowledge to hurt me and hurt people I love. I never meant to hurt you specifically, she said again. But you did hurt me specifically. You stole my identity. You put my reputation at risk. You made me question every relationship I have, every person I trust. Even if you never meant to hurt me, the fact is that you did, and I don't know if I can get past that. Jessica nodded, accepting what I was saying even though I could see it was devastating for her to hear. I understand, she said. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, especially not now. I just wanted you to know that losing your love, losing your friendship, is the worst consequence of all this. Worse than prison, worse than the shame, worse than anything else that's going to happen to me. Then why did you do it? I asked. If our relationship meant so much to you, why were you willing to risk it? Because I thought I was smarter than I actually am, she said with a bitter laugh. I thought I could take just enough money to get back on my feet, and then I would pay it all back before anyone noticed, and no one would ever have to know. I thought I could solve my problems without consequences, without having to face the reality of what I had become. I looked at my cousin, this person I had shared a lifetime of memories with, and tried to find some trace of the girl I had grown up loving. She was in there somewhere, I thought, underneath all the poor choices and desperation and self-deception. But I didn't know if that was enough anymore. I have to go, I said, standing up from the table. I can't do this anymore today. Sarah, wait. Jessica reached across the table as if to grab my hand, then stopped herself. Would you consider writing a letter to the judge? For the sentencing hearing? Not asking for leniency necessarily, but maybe explaining what kind of person I used to be, before everything went wrong? I stared at her, amazed that she was still trying to find ways to minimize the consequences of her actions. You want me to help you get a lighter sentence? I want the judge to know that I'm not just a criminal, she said desperately. I want them to know that I'm a person who made terrible mistakes, not someone who's fundamentally bad. I want them to know that there are people who remember when I was better than this. Jessica, you are a criminal now. That's what you've become. And I don't think it's my responsibility to help you avoid the consequences of that choice. I walked away from her then, leaving her sitting alone in the coffee shop with her tears and her regrets and her shattered dreams. As I drove home, I felt empty in a way I had never experienced before, as if something essential had been carved out of my chest and I would never get it back. The months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, family meetings, and therapy sessions that I had never imagined I would need. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the therapist my insurance company had recommended, had a small office that smelled like vanilla candles and was decorated with soothing watercolors of beach scenes. She specialized in trauma recovery, specifically cases involving betrayal by family members or close friends. What you're experiencing is called betrayal trauma, Dr. Hendricks explained during our first session. It's different from other types of trauma because it involves someone you trusted completely, someone who was supposed to be safe. The psychological impact can be more severe than trauma inflicted by strangers because it damages your fundamental ability to trust your own judgment. I sat in the soft leather chair across from her desk, holding a cup of chamomile tea that I couldn't seem to drink, and tried to make sense of the chaos in my head. I keep replaying everything, I told her. Every conversation Jessica and I had over the past year, every time she stayed at my apartment, every family gathering where she seemed normal and loving and like herself. I'm looking for signs I missed, clues that should have told me what she was planning. That's a very common response, Dr. Hendricks said gently. You're trying to regain a sense of control by believing that if you had just been more observant, more suspicious, you could have prevented this. But the truth is that someone who's determined to deceive you, especially someone who knows you intimately, can be very good at hiding their true intentions. But I'm supposed to be smart, I said, feeling frustrated with myself and with the entire situation. I'm an accountant, for God's sake. I deal with financial fraud cases at work all the time. I should have known something was wrong. Professional knowledge and personal vulnerability are two different things, she replied. At work, you're looking for fraud committed by strangers against your clients. You're in analytical mode, viewing everything with appropriate skepticism. But with family members, your brain operates differently. You're in relationship mode, where trust and love and shared history override analytical thinking. That's not a weakness, Sarah. That's what makes us human. Over the weeks that followed, Dr. Hendricks helped me understand that my reaction to Jessica's betrayal was normal and that recovery would take time. She explained that I might experience symptoms similar to post-traumatic stress, hypervigilance, anxiety, depression, difficulty sleeping, and problems concentrating. She was right about all of it. I found myself checking my bank accounts obsessively, sometimes multiple times per day, even though I had already changed all my passwords and set up additional security measures. I started locking my filing cabinet at home, hiding important documents in places that even I sometimes forgot about. I became suspicious of coworkers who asked casual questions about my personal life, wondering if they had ulterior motives. The most difficult part was the impact on my relationships with other family members. Trust, I discovered, is not something you can compartmentalize. Once Jessica had shattered my faith in my own judgment about people, that doubt began to infect every other relationship I had. When my brother called to ask if he could borrow my car for a weekend trip, I found myself wondering if he really needed it for the reasons he claimed or if he was planning to use it for something else. When my mother offered to help me organize my home office, I felt a flicker of paranoia about what she might see or take. When my father suggested that I give him a spare key to my apartment for emergencies, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I hate what she's done to me, I told Dr. Hendricks during a particularly difficult session in November. It's not just the money she stole or even the identity theft. It's that she's made me into someone I don't want to be. Someone suspicious and guarded and unable to trust the people who love me. Healing from betrayal trauma often involves grieving multiple losses, Dr. Hendricks replied. You're grieving the relationship you had with Jessica, yes, but you're also grieving the person you were before this happened. The Sarah who could trust freely, who assumed the best about people, who felt safe in the world. That's a real loss, and it's natural to feel angry about it. Jessica's trial was scheduled for late January, 4 months after her arrest. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Amanda Chen, explained that Jessica was facing multiple felony charges: identity theft, wire fraud, elder abuse, and grand theft. If convicted on all counts, she could face up to 20 years in prison. The case against her is very strong, Prosecutor Chen told me and the other family members during a meeting at the district attorney's office. We have documentation of the thefts, security camera footage, physical evidence from her notebook, and her own admissions during police interviews. Her attorney is likely to recommend that she accept a plea bargain. The plea bargain, when it came, was for 8 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years, in exchange for Jessica pleading guilty to all charges and agreeing to make restitution to the family. It meant we wouldn't have to go through the ordeal of a trial, wouldn't have to testify in court or relive the details of her betrayal in a public setting. But it also meant that Jessica would be sentenced and sent away without any of us having the opportunity to tell her, officially and on the record, how her actions had affected us. Victim impact statements are typically given at sentencing hearings, and if Jessica accepted the plea deal, there would be no formal sentencing hearing. I want to give a victim impact statement, I told Prosecutor Chen. If there's any way to make that happen, I need to do it. She explained that Jessica's attorney might agree to include victim impact statements as part of the plea hearing, but it wasn't guaranteed. I can ask, she said, but you should be prepared for the possibility that Jessica will accept the plea deal and be sentenced without any additional proceedings. 3 days before Christmas, Jessica's attorney called to inform us that Jessica wanted to meet with the family before accepting the plea deal. Not to negotiate or ask for leniency, but to apologize in person and to hear directly from us about how our actions had affected our lives. The meeting was scheduled for December 28 at the courthouse, in a small conference room that smelled like industrial carpet and fluorescent lights. Jessica was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her, looking thinner and more fragile than when I had seen her at the coffee shop months earlier. All the family members who had been directly affected by her theft were there: my parents, my grandmother, Uncle Robert, and myself. Aunt Anna was there too, sitting beside Uncle Robert with tears already streaming down her face before anyone had said a word. Jessica looked around the room at all of us, her eyes lingering on each face as if she was trying to memorize us. When she spoke, her voice was steady but quiet.
I want to start by saying that I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, she said. I know that what I've done is unforgivable, and I'm not here to try to convince you otherwise. I'm here because I need you to know how deeply sorry I am, and because I need to hear from you about what I've put you through. I owe you that much, at least. My grandmother was the first to speak. At 74, she had lived through the Great Depression, World War II, and decades of hardship, but I had never seen her look as fragile as she did in that moment. Jessica, honey, she said, her voice trembling with emotion, I keep trying to understand how we got here. I keep thinking about when you were little, how you used to spend summers with me, how we would bake cookies and work in the garden and talk about everything under the sun. You were such a sweet child, so caring and thoughtful. Where did that little girl go? Jessica's composure broke at those words. She buried her face in her cuffed hands and sobbed with a raw, desperate sound that filled the small room. She's still here, Grandma, she managed to say through her tears. That little girl is still here, and she's horrified by what the grown-up version of her has done. She's ashamed and terrified and wishing she could go back and make different choices. But you can't go back, my father said, his voice harder than I had ever heard it. You can't undo the months of lies and theft and deception. You can't give us back the sense of security and trust that you stole along with our money. He leaned forward in his chair, and I could see the anger and disappointment radiating from him. Do you know what it's like to lie awake at night wondering how someone you raised, someone you loved like your own daughter, could look you in the eye and steal from you? Do you know what it's like to question every interaction you've had with that person, wondering what was real and what was manipulation? I know it now, Jessica whispered. I lie awake every night thinking about it. Uncle Robert spoke next, his voice thick with emotion. I put up my house to bail you out of jail, Jessica. My house that I've worked 30 years to pay for, the house where your mother and I built our life together. I did that because I still believed, even after everything, that you were worth saving. I did it because I couldn't bear the thought of you sitting in jail while we figured out what to do. And now I'm wondering if that was the right choice, or if I just enabled you one more time. It was the right choice, Aunt Anna said suddenly, speaking for the first time since we had arrived. Robert, it was the right choice because she's our daughter and we don't abandon our children, no matter what they've done. She looked at Jessica with a mixture of love and anguish that was painful to witness. But Jessica, I need you to understand that loving you doesn't mean excusing what you've done. I need you to know that this has destroyed me. I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't concentrate on anything because I keep thinking about how I failed as a mother, about what I did wrong that led you to believe this was acceptable. Mom, no, Jessica said desperately. You didn't fail me. You were a wonderful mother. This isn't your fault. Then whose fault is it? Aunt Anna demanded. Because I have to blame someone, Jessica. I have to find a reason why my daughter became someone who could steal from her own grandmother. I have to understand how the girl I raised to be honest and kind and responsible turned into someone who could plan and execute this level of betrayal. The room fell silent except for the sound of muffled crying. Finally, I found my voice. I want to read something, I said, pulling out a letter I had written the night before. I wrote this because I knew I wouldn't be able to say everything I needed to say without forgetting something important. I unfolded the paper with shaking hands and began to read. Jessica, for 28 years, you were one of the most important people in my life. You were my closest friend, my confidant, my chosen sister. I trusted you with my deepest secrets, my greatest fears, and my most precious dreams. I would have done anything for you, given you anything I had, supported you through any crisis, no matter how difficult or complicated. I paused, looking up at her face. She was watching me intently, tears still flowing but her expression focused and attentive. When I found out what you had done, I didn't just lose the money you stole or worry about the legal consequences of having my identity used for fraud. I lost my faith in my own judgment. I lost my sense of safety in the world. I lost my ability to trust freely and completely, not just with you but with everyone in my life. My voice was getting stronger as I continued reading. You took advantage of every kind gesture I had ever made toward you. Every time I gave you my spare key, every time I left you alone in my apartment, every time I shared personal information about our family members, you were gathering intelligence to use against us. You turned our love into a weapon and used it to hurt the very people who cared about you most. Jessica was crying harder now, but I pressed on. But what hurts the most is not what you did, Jessica. It's who you became in order to do it. The cousin I grew up with would have been appalled by the person you turned into. She would have been the first one to stand up and say that this behavior was wrong, that family doesn't treat family this way, that trust is sacred and shouldn't be violated. I folded the letter and looked directly at her. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you completely. I don't know if I'll ever be able to think about you without feeling this mixture of love and betrayal and grief. But I want you to know that I'm going to try to heal from what you've done to me, and I hope that someday you'll be able to understand why that healing has to happen without you. Jessica accepted the plea bargain on January 15th. The hearing lasted less than an hour, during which she formally pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 8 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the family, though everyone understood that someone facing years in prison would have no realistic way to earn the money to do so. I didn't attend the hearing. I had said everything I needed to say during our meeting at the courthouse, and I couldn't bear to watch Jessica being led away in handcuffs, to be there for the final moment when she officially disappeared from our lives. Instead, I went to work that day, focusing on spreadsheets and client meetings and the comfortable routine of numbers that always added up correctly. Uncle Robert called me that evening to tell me it was over. She asked me to give you a message, he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. She wanted you to know that she understands why you weren't there today, and she hopes that someday you'll be able to remember the good times without pain. I thanked him for telling me and hung up the phone, then sat in my quiet apartment trying to figure out how I felt now that Jessica was officially out of my life for the foreseeable future. I had expected to feel relief, or closure, or some sense that justice had been served. Instead, I just felt empty, as if a piece of my history had been surgically removed and I was still adjusting to the absence. Over the following months, I threw myself into rebuilding my life and my relationships. Dr. Hendricks helped me work through my trust issues, teaching me techniques for distinguishing between reasonable caution and paralyzing suspicion. I gradually became more comfortable giving my spare key to my parents, sharing personal information with close friends, and allowing people into my home and my heart without constantly worrying about their ulterior motives. The financial recovery was more straightforward than the emotional healing. My insurance covered some of the losses, the bank reimbursed others, and the family decided not to pursue recovery for the remaining amounts. We all agreed that we would rather absorb the financial hit than spend years dealing with lawyers and collection agencies and the ongoing stress of trying to get money from someone who was in prison. My grandmother was the most forgiving of all of us, which didn't surprise anyone who knew her. "I've been poor before," she said during a family dinner in March. "Money comes and goes, but family is supposed to be forever. I'm not going to let what Jessica did poison the rest of my relationships or make me bitter in my old age." "But how do you do it, Mom?" my father asked. "How do you just let go of that much anger and betrayal?" "I don't let go of it," she replied. "I carry it with me, just like I carry all the other painful things that have happened in my life. But I don't let it define me or control me. I choose to focus on the people who are still here, still trustworthy, still part of my life." That conversation stayed with me as I continued working through my own healing process. I began to understand that recovery from betrayal trauma wasn't about forgetting what had happened or pretending it didn't matter. It was about learning to carry the pain without letting it consume me, about rebuilding trust selectively and carefully, about honoring both the love I had felt for Jessica and the damage she had done. 6 months after Jessica was sentenced, I received my first letter from her. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, addressed in her familiar handwriting but with a return address from the California Women's Prison in Chowchilla. I stared at the envelope for several minutes before deciding to open it. The letter was 3 pages long, written on standard lined paper in the careful script I remembered from childhood. Jessica wrote about her daily routine in prison, about the job she had been assigned in the library, about the classes she was taking to earn her GED since her college degree didn't seem to matter much in her current situation. She wrote about the other women she had met, some of whom had committed crimes far worse than hers, and about how seeing their stories had given her perspective on her own situation. "I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to try to justify what I did," she wrote in the final paragraph. I know I have no right to expect anything from you or from the family. I'm writing because I want you to know that I think about the harm I caused every single day, and I'm working to become someone who could never do those things again. I don't know if that matters to you, but it's the only thing I can offer. I read the letter several times, then put it in a box with other important documents I wasn't sure what to do with. I didn't reply immediately. I wasn't sure I wanted to open up communication with Jessica, wasn't sure I was ready to have her back in my life in any capacity, even as a pen pal. But the letter stayed with me, and after a few weeks, I found myself thinking about the cousin I had loved for so many years. Not the person who had stolen from us, but the girl who had shared her Halloween candy with me when I forgot to go trick-or-treating, who had stayed up all night with me when my first boyfriend broke my heart, who had been my maid of honor and my emergency contact and my closest friend for most of my life. Dr. Hendricks and I talked about the letter during our sessions, exploring what it might mean for my healing process if I chose to maintain some form of relationship with Jessica. There's no right or wrong answer here, she told me. Some people find that maintaining contact with the person who betrayed them is helpful for their recovery, while others need complete separation to heal. The important thing is that you make the choice that feels right for you, not what other people think you should do. I miss her, I admitted during one particularly difficult session. I hate that I miss her after what she did, but I can't just turn off 28 years of love and shared history. Part of me wants to write back to her, wants to know how she's doing, wants to believe that she really is trying to become a better person. And what would that look like? Dr. Hendricks asked. If you did decide to maintain some level of contact with Jessica, what boundaries would you need to set to protect yourself? That question led to several weeks of careful consideration about what kind of relationship, if any, I might be able to have with Jessica going forward. I realized that I would never again be able to trust her completely, would never again be able to share intimate details of my life or my family's lives with her. But I also realized that part of my healing process might involve finding a way to maintain some connection to the person she had been before everything went wrong. 3 months after receiving her first letter, I finally wrote back. It was a short note, carefully neutral in tone, acknowledging that I had received her letter and that I was glad to hear she was doing well in prison. I didn't share any personal information about my life or ask detailed questions about hers. I simply let her know that I was working on healing from what had happened and that I wished her well in her efforts to rebuild herself. Her response came quickly, and it was clear that she was grateful to hear from me even in such a limited way. She didn't push for more information or try to resume our old level of intimacy. She simply thanked me for writing and assured me that she understood why I needed to maintain boundaries. Over the following months, we settled into an occasional correspondence that felt sustainable for both of us. Jessica would write every few months with updates about her life in prison, and I would respond briefly, sharing general information about how I was doing without going into specifics about work or relationships or family activities. It wasn't the relationship we had once had, and it never would be again. But it was something, a thin thread of connection that acknowledged our shared history while respecting the reality of what Jessica had done and how it had changed everything between us. 2 years after Jessica was sentenced, I received an unexpected phone call from her. She had earned the privilege of making phone calls to family members, and she had chosen to use one of her monthly allotted calls to contact me. Sarah? Her voice sounded different over the scratchy prison phone line, more mature somehow, steadier than it had been during our last face-to-face conversation. Hi, Jessica. I was at home, sitting in my kitchen at the same table where I had received that first phone call from Detective Rodriguez years earlier. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. I wanted to call because I have some news, she said. I've been accepted into a program here that allows certain inmates to work toward making restitution to their victims. It's not much money, but I wanted you to know that I'm starting to pay back what I stole from the family. I was surprised by how little the prospect of financial restitution mattered to me. The money had never been the real issue, and getting it back now wouldn't undo the damage that had been done. That's good, Jessica. I'm glad you're taking responsibility for what you did. There's something else, she continued. I've been working with a counselor here, talking about the depression and the desperation that led me to make those choices. I understand now that what I did wasn't just about money or financial problems. It was about feeling powerless and trying to regain control in the worst possible way.
I'm glad you're getting help, I said, and I meant it. I hope it's making a difference for you. It is. And Sarah, I want you to know that I understand now why you couldn't forgive me right away, why you needed space, why our relationship had to change. I used to think that if I just apologized enough, if I explained my situation well enough, everyone would understand and things could go back to the way they were. But I understand now that some things can't be undone, no matter how sorry you are. We talked for a few more minutes about neutral topics, her job in the prison library, a book she had read, the classes she was taking. When the automated system announced that we had 1 minute left on the call, Jessica's voice became more urgent. Sarah, I need you to know that losing your friendship, losing your trust, has been the hardest part of all this. Harder than prison, harder than the shame, harder than anything else. I know I may never earn it back completely, but I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the love you used to have for me. The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me sitting in my kitchen with tears streaming down my face, mourning once again for the relationship we had lost and the cousin I had once known. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I also felt something that might have been hope. Not hope that Jessica and I would ever return to the way we once were, but hope that she was genuinely changing, that she was learning from what had happened, that she was becoming someone who could live with integrity and make better choices. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something. It was the recognition that people are capable of change, that redemption is possible even after the most profound betrayals, that love doesn't always disappear even when trust is shattered beyond repair. As I sit here now, 5 years after Jessica was first arrested, I can say that my life has moved forward in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark early months. I've rebuilt my relationships with the rest of my family, stronger and more intentional than they were before. I've learned to trust again, carefully but genuinely, and I've found that my capacity for love wasn't permanently damaged by Jessica's betrayal. I still receive letters from Jessica occasionally, and sometimes I write back. She has 3 more years before she's eligible for parole, and we've never discussed what might happen between us if and when she's released. I don't know if I'll ever feel comfortable having her back in my life in any meaningful way. I don't know if the rest of the family will ever be able to move past what she did. But I've learned that healing from betrayal doesn't require having all the answers. It doesn't require perfect forgiveness or complete understanding or even a happy ending. It requires accepting that some losses are permanent, that some relationships change irrevocably, and that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the damage never happened. Jessica used my identity to rob our family, but in the end, she couldn't steal who I really am. She couldn't take away my capacity for love, my ability to trust, or my fundamental belief in the possibility of human decency. She changed me, certainly, but she didn't destroy me. And perhaps that's the most important thing I've learned from this entire devastating experience, that resilience isn't about avoiding betrayal or protecting yourself from all possible hurt. It's about finding a way to continue loving and trusting and hoping, even after someone you trusted most has shown you how deeply people can disappoint each other. The story of what happened between Jessica and me will never have a neat resolution, will never be tied up with a bow or end with everyone reconciled and happy. But it's a story about surviving betrayal, about the complexity of family relationships, about the long, difficult process of healing from wounds inflicted by someone you love. It's a story about learning that forgiveness and trust are different things, that love and relationship are different things, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to maintain boundaries that protect both of you from further harm. Nobody imagines, when they're building a life surrounded by people they love and trust, that one of those people might someday use that love and trust as weapons against them. Nobody imagines that the cousin who shared their childhood, their secrets, their deepest bonds of affection, might be capable of such calculated betrayal. But life has a way of presenting us with situations we never imagined, and the test isn't whether we can avoid those situations but whether we can find a way to survive them with our essential selves intact. I survived. We all survived. And while the family I knew before Jessica's crimes will never exist again, the family that emerged from this crisis is stronger in some ways, more honest about our vulnerabilities and more intentional about our connections to each other. We've learned not to take trust for granted, but we've also learned not to let fear of betrayal prevent us from loving each other. Jessica is still my cousin, still someone I share a lifetime of memories with, still someone I once loved more than almost anyone in the world.
But she's also someone who made choices that irrevocably changed our relationship and our family. Both of those things can be true at the same time, and learning to hold that contradiction has been one of the most important parts of my healing journey. I don't know what the future holds for Jessica and me, or for Jessica and our family. I don't know if she'll successfully rebuild her life when she's released from prison, or if she'll be able to maintain the changes she claims to have made. I don't know if there will ever come a time when I feel comfortable trusting her again, or if our relationship will always be limited to occasional letters and brief, careful conversations. But I know that I'm no longer consumed by anger or consumed by the need for answers that may never come. I've learned to live with ambiguity, to accept that some stories don't have endings that satisfy our need for closure or justice or redemption. I've learned that healing is not a destination but a process, not something you achieve once and then maintain forever, but something you work at every day. Most importantly, I've learned that the love I had for Jessica, even though it was betrayed and had to be transformed, wasn't wasted or meaningless. It was real, it was valuable, and it taught me things about loyalty and connection and the complexity of human relationships that I carry with me in all my other relationships. The fact that Jessica ultimately proved unworthy of that love doesn't diminish its value or make me regret having felt it. The story of what Jessica did to our family is a story of betrayal, yes, but it's also a story of resilience, of the possibility of healing, of the ways that even the most devastating experiences can teach us something important about ourselves and about what it means to be human. It's a story that's still being written, and I don't know how it will end. But I'm no longer afraid of that uncertainty, no longer consumed by the need to control outcomes I can't control. I'm simply grateful to have survived it, to have learned from it, and to have emerged from it as someone who was perhaps more careful about trust but no less capable of love. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's more than enough.